Sunday afternoon. Welcome everyone, my name is Michelle Sugihara. I'm the Executive Director of CAPE, the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. And we are trying to change the face of media from the writer's room to the boardroom to your living room. And our two major fellowships are our CAPE Writers Fellowship, which opens submission December 1, so if I have any writers out there, get your scripts ready. Submissions open December 1st. They'll be open for about a month. The actual fellowship runs March through April, so I hope to see a lot of you come out for that. And our second fellowship is our Leaders Fellowship that focuses on junior executives, because that is the C-suite, those are the gatekeepers, and so we need to have Asian Americans represented in those rooms as well. So thank you all for coming. Hope to see you at future events. Congratulations to LACFF on a fabulous festival, and we'll see you outside after.
All right, so let's get started here with this creative panel, and let me quickly introduce the great guests we have, starting from my left all the way over. First, we have Jessica Gao, who's an Emmy-winning writer from Rick and Morty, as well as Silicon Valley and Robot Chicken. And next to Jessica is Jimmy O. Yang, actor, comedian from Silicon Valley, Crazy Rich Asians, and now author of the book How to American, An Immigrant's Guide to Disappointing Your Parents, which we're going to talk lots about. And next to Jimmy is Rachel Song, who is an independent film producer and was on Variety's 10 Producers to Watch in 2018. She's also the founder and president of Access Media, and she's the producer of films that have screened at Sundance, such as A Kid Like Jake and Nancy. And Ray Yao is a Chinese author, screenwriter, and director. He is an associate professor of Guangzhou University and currently a visiting scholar at UCLA. And on the end, we have Helen Sheng, who is a writer on Hannibal, Heart of Darkness, and the new upcoming season of 13 Reasons Why. Yay! Who has her own crew here, apparently. So let me start with something that was touched upon briefly at the end of the last panel. And I know we have a lot of young, aspiring creatives, working creatives in our audience today. And oftentimes the very first question is how people got their first big break into the industry. But I think we all know, as children of Chinese and Asian parents, there's another question before that, which is, how did you break free from your parents' iron grip and their impossible expectations? Jimmy, let me start with you, because you actually wrote a whole book about this, which is available outside, actually, after this panel, How to American, right here. Jimmy's going to be signing copies for a few minutes as well. Can you start us off with just kind of your experience and, with your parents?
Yeah, I went to a very traditional college education. Like, I feel like for Asian kids, it's not a choice if you can go to college or not. It's like high school, you go to school. Or, you become homeless, as they say. I went to UCSD because I didn't get into UCLA or USC. So my parents are already very disappointed at that point. And I studied economics. I didn't know what I wanted to do, much like most young people, So I studied economics. It was like the easiest major that will still please my Asian parents. And I did that for 5 years. And I had an internship. I just really hated it. And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't stand doing it. So it was like a moment where I have to tell my dad, hey, I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna go do this thing called stand-up comedy. And he has no idea. He's like, what do you mean, like a talk show or something? Like, what? He doesn't even have a concept of stand-up. So I knew he was like super disappointed. He sent me like careerbuilder.email.coms like every day, but I always just thought, yeah, they want the best for you, but him growing up like in China during the Communist Revolution, like he really didn't have a chance to do and pursue what he loved. But so he kind of couldn't understand my point of view, because it is what people don't understand. Like like comedy, acting, directing, writing, it is a real job if you work hard at it. It's just like everything else when you in America, maybe not in other places, right? So, but I have to kind of prove that to myself also. And I always figure it's fine to disappoint your parents for a few years. Eventually they'll come back around. You know, it's better to disappoint my parents for a few years than to disappoint myself for like the rest of my life. You know, that's what I thought. But it seems like you guys are all here because you've already kind of taken that leap. Many of disappointed parents out there. So great that you guys.
Now, what about Rachel, for example? Did you have a similar experience with your family, especially back in China?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, like a little bit different from Jimmy, because I grew up in China, born and raised in China. I did my Gaokao in Hebei province, which is super competitive and crazy. And I remember when I was in high school, I told my parents I wanted to go to film school. But they were like, no, you have to like have a really high score in Gaokao, like, because parents, they want to compare their kids to other kids. Like my kids have like higher score, like I'm better, like that kind of stuff. But so I was like, yeah, but still, like if I go to like schools like Beijing Film Academy, like I don't have to do a really high score. I have to go to the other tests for the program. But then I found a program in Peking University. So I told them, oh, hey, there's a like kind of like film school in that Peking University, and maybe I'll do that. And they were like so happy, and so they supported me through that process.
So there's a Beijing University and a Peking University.
Peking University, it is the Beijing University, 北京大学. Yeah. So, but when after I went to film school, I realized it isn't what I want. Like they're teaching, like I don't know what they're teaching. I want to learn something real. Then I told my mom I want to go to United States to learn, to be a musical actor. My mom's face started to turn like red, so I was like, okay, I'll be a producer. And she was like, what's a producer? That's a question people always ask you in China. Like, what do you do? Like, producer? Are you rich or like something? Or do you have a coal mine like in your home, or something like that? But
so I guess it's better to make them confused than to make them cry right away.
I was like, it's a legit career. Such as, like compared to like maybe people are doing finance or accounting. I mean, like it's legit. You can compare your kid to like other kids.
Now, Jessica or Ellen, I mean, you obviously have worked in American TV, and your parents can actually watch your work on TV.
They don't.
I could have predicted that. But at least, I mean, Jessica, I gotta ask, like, the trophy, are they taking the trophy to all their friends, and has that kind of like...
They very quickly came over to my house to take pictures with the statue.
All right, so that's basically the best possible outcome, I think.
Yeah, because I think what's really hard for them is that it feels conceptual to say that your kid works in a creative field, because they're so used to having metrics of like, when I go to China and people, like friends of my parents ask me what I do, and I say I'm a screenwriter, they go like, well, what's your ranking? And I was like, what? There's no national ranking for screenwriters. Who would be in charge of that? Like, what would their metrics be? But like, they just need some sort of way to, like Rachel said, like compare so that they can say, my kid's better. Mine's the #1 screenwriter, your kid's the #3 screenwriter. Like, they needed something to compare, and I think having any sort of award solidifies and makes it seem legitimate that this is real and it's not just something that I've been like lying about for over a decade.
Mental note, to start my own award show, give myself a trophy.
Well, it has to be something they've heard of. That's the other thing too.
I'll just call it like Emmys with an I or something at the end, the Emmys.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so funny that awards mean so much, because I remember when I got my first TV writing job, I called my parents and I told them I got this job writing in TV. And my dad said, so when are you gonna win an Oscar? And I said, well, that's for movies, like I'm writing for TV. It's a different award for TV, it's called an Emmy. And he said, so you're saying you're not going to win an Oscar? And then that was the end of the conversation.
Ang Lee has an Oscar. So let me move into kind of a topic that is also, I'm sure, on a lot of young creatives' minds, which is about breaking into the industry. So Helen, I read about kind of just, you had this kind of turn from, I think it was originally comedy writing to kind of darker writing on shows like Hannibal and whatnot. And can you talk a little bit about, how maybe you entered into the industry, and if, there's maybe young writers out here who are trying to break into TV, what that landscape maybe looks like right now?
Yes, for sure. Okay, so I came out here after college knowing that I wanted to do something in TV, and like, back then I was just like, oh, what are my favorite shows? Oh, I like, some comedies like Big Bang Theory, and I also like some dramas like House, and I didn't know then what I really wanted to do, but then, like, I started out being a PA, first an intern, then a PA, then an assistant, and just kind of like working on shows through that. Yeah, so that's kind of, and then like through writing my scripts on my own time, I realized, comedy's not right for me, it's not the right fit. Like the room situation where you kind of have to be on all the time, I kind of like to sit in a hole and have it be dark and think by myself. So I was like, okay, I'm a drama writer. But through breaking in, I don't think there's ever just like one thing. For me, it was a combination of being an assistant for a long time, working with various people, building up those relationships, and then doing a lot of fellowships. I was in the CAPE Fellowship. Yes. The CAPE Fellowship is great. Like, it was through that, I was in the CBS Fellowship for Comedy when I recently started out, building connections through there, just being friends with screenwriters, and then you get like, you hear about like job openings, and you hear about, basically that, like if you have an opportunity, some of these people might put in a reference for you. And so that's kind of like what happened to me when I got Hannibal, was that I heard that there was like an opening for season 3, and then a former boss of mine like sent in a good word, my agents submitted me. Meanwhile, I was in the CAPE program, and so all these things all work together.
I would say that if there is a traditional, quote-unquote, conventional way to get into screenwriting, that probably is it, which is to start off as some sort of assistant in the industry. A lot of people start off as production assistants, executive assistants, and then from there, they work on their writing on the side, and then when there's an opening for a writer's assistant, like that's the coveted job that aspiring writers want. They get the job to be a writer's assistant because usually through the fact that they've been an assistant, they've created relationships like Helen said, and then they get the job as a writer's assistant, and if you do your job well and you pitch and you have a good showrunner who actually does want to nurture their writer's assistant, usually within 1 or 2 seasons, they will end up promoting you to staff writer, which is the kind of entry-level writing job that you can get. And I would say that is probably the most conventional, traditional, like if you're trying to look for some sort of track to go on, being an assistant is it. And then the other thing is writing fellowship, because that's how I got my start too, is through a writing fellowship. I did the Nickelodeon writing fellowship, and from out of the fellowship, I got my first staffing job.
Now, Rachel, kind of shifting to, the Chinese industry, because you have experience and success in both industries. What would you say are kind of the maybe most exciting ways for young writers or filmmakers to maybe break into the Chinese industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're thinking to talk about that. Right now we are actually making content for the Chinese audience, both features and online series. And I love to work with new writers because I have actually a development executive working at my company and now becoming a writer. So through the development process, we realized, oh, she's so talented at this. She's meant to be this writer for these 2 episodes. Because we work sort of like a writer's room. With me and my colleagues and writers writing together. It's a very dirty room, but and all of them are girls. So I realized that you don't really have to, identify yourself, oh, I'm a writer or I'm not a writer. If you feel like, you have this urge to tell a story and you are talented, you just keep writing. and you have to, like show your stuff to, producers or friends in this industry. And in China, I think it's kind of different from here, because here you have unions and everything, like different screenwriting programs for upcoming writers. But China is kind of like a mess right now. Especially for, I'm a producer, I want to find new writers. I don't know where to find them. I couldn't just find students graduated from school. Maybe they're not good, maybe they're good, you never know. Like schools doesn't give them a badge of good screenwriting. That's not true. So you have to really to work with people, talk with people, and find people with the similar vibe and energy with you, with your team, and like really good personality. They can work together and help them, and at the same time help yourself, to work on the project together and help them to start writing. And maybe like you can create a show together and the next show together. But it's really like a workshop thing. There's no system there. So I would say, like young writers or students graduated from college, just keep writing, and like Jessica said, you can go to production companies for assistant job, doing development. That's really, really helpful doing development. And, maybe go to some screenwriting workshops with your friends. You have to find the opportunity and just don't quit writing, yeah.
Absolutely. Somebody in the previous panel had mentioned that basically when you're kind of choosing people to collaborate with in the industry, it's like a marriage, because you're going to see them every day for years, and hopefully you don't guys hate each other until year 2. So sticking with the Chinese side of the industry though, Ray, especially with your perspective as a scholar who not only creates in the industry, but studies both industries, what would you say are kind of the biggest cultural differences between maybe TV in China and the US, whether it's from the audience point of view or from, like a filmmaker or a writer's point of view?
I'd like to answer this question from 2 perspectives. The first one is the core value and the target audience. The second one is a rating system. For the first one, the core value, and in terms of the core value and target audience, I think American put more emphasis on the individualism and the friendship, and the target audience are very diverse. In China, it put more emphasis on family, and the target audience is typically the female audience. So there is a very popular TV drama type called Wives and Their Mother-in-Laws drama, which is 婆媳剧 in China. And because it depicts the relationship and the conflicts between the wives and their mother-in-laws. Because obedience is the most important merit and moral criterion in traditional Chinese culture. And nowadays, more and more multi-generational families living together under the same roof. So, which creates the conflicts more often between the wives and their mother-in-law. And the elderly lady audience like to use that kind of drama to teach their son how to avoid finding a bad wife as the TV dramas. So I think that's the reason why it's very popular. And another popular type of TV drama, I think, is concubines confliction drama, which is 宫斗剧. The female audience are interested in watching the concubines and the emperor's mothers fighting with each other. And they feel very happy, I think. So that's from the core value and target audience. And for the rating system, actually in China, we use the censorship instead of the rating system. And I have oh, please, you first.
I think there's another type of TV show that people really, really like in China. It's another cultural difference thing. 偶像剧. That's like, like all the girls, they love it. I think when I was in high school, I grew up on that. And I have a very funny story I want to share. I have an American friend. She's also a writer. She's American. And she has this great hobby of watching K-drama on Netflix. Like they have so many Korean drama, Hanju. And recently Netflix bought a lot of Chinese TV shows and she started watching them. So the other day she told me she watched the show, the name is Meteor Garden. I was like, I didn't realize what was Meteor Garden. I was like, what? Like Meteor Miner's Garden? What? But she told me the show was horrible. The guy, the guy in the show, he was like beating the girl in the classroom, and people were like worshiping him, like he was like really beating her. And she said there was another Korean version of that drama, and Lee Min-ho was in it. And he was like really like bullying the girl in school, and everyone's like feels so good about it. I was like, yeah, it's like very different. Like it's kind of like a tough love, like 大刀总裁爱上我 or something like that people really enjoy. I enjoyed that when I was young. And sometimes still enjoy it. I mean, like, because we are also making, like trying to make shows for the millennials in China. I think the young audience, they always like something like that, but we have to add, the new things and like as filmmakers to inspire them and new visions to the same story they always enjoy. So I think it's a very interesting thing. Just want to share.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
it'd be
much.
nice if you guys started a new genre that didn't involve fighting women.
Fighting woman. So let me try to finish my part. As I told censorship, I'd like to share some stories with you. 20 years ago, I think, a director hired a very famous actress as a protagonist for his film in 1996, I think. The feature film is a love romance about the street vendor selling handkerchief while finding love in the street. And the protagonist's mother was paid in surplus handkerchiefs by their factory because the factory was unable to pay her salary. So the protagonist had to go to the street to sell the handkerchiefs to earn the money. But however, the censor bureau rejected this film for the reason that the factory was unable to pay her mother's salary. And the director was devastated to the point that he was unable to eat for several days, as that was the premise for his film. And after that, a friend helped him to contact an official within the censor bureau, and they were instructed to change the plot for a little bit, and they passed the censor. Guess what? Instead of stating that the factory was unable to pay her mother's salary, they state that the factory was unable to pay her mother's year-end bonus, since the failure of paying year-end bonus is more welcoming than the failure of paying the salary. So under that circumstances, sometimes we have to self-censor before come up with an idea. Even though there are some unwritten criterion or hidden criterion for censorship, like after the establishment of the People's Republic of China, the horror story about monster were forbidden. 建国以后，妖怪不能成精。And the high school students having love romance are allowed, but they must result in failure or break up. 高中生可以谈恋爱，但是必须失败。Things like that. So although things like that, let me talk a little bit about my film, Angry Kid. Angry Kid actually is a Chinese version of Home Alone. Behind the comedy, we'd like to convey the leftover children issues in recent China. And our initial idea, the protagonist used to beg and steal for again. But we have to tell the story in an ambiguous way in order to pass the censorship. So actually nowadays, comedy become a method to get around the censorship. Although things like that, I think censorship can play a positive role in a way, to the extent that it can protect the children audience from seeing too erratic and too violent in the big screen. And also, I think any creation, any creation is subject to some certain restriction and limitations. Censorship shouldn't be taken as an excuse for making a bad movie. And also in China nowadays, the censorship is more open than before. Like the acclaimed TV drama In the Name of the People, 人民的名义, it depicted the government's anti-corruption movements. I think it's a progress.
So Ray, let me jump in kind of, I think we're going to come back to the idea of censorship and creative limitations. But I think one of the things that you brought up, which was really great, is that the process of development is different in the two industries between China and the US. And I want to see if Jessica, if you, Helen, and Jimmy too, because I mean, I feel like as an actor and a performer, you're still involved in the process of kind of like developing the show as it goes. Especially for the Chinese audience members here who might have never worked in television or kind of been involved. What is the process like from basically pitch to development to room to eventually we'll have the second Chinese show on TV thanks to Jessica, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Okay, so when you first come up with an idea for a TV show, there's usually you'll probably go to either a pod company, which is a production company that has a deal with a studio, or straight to a studio. Because there's a difference between a television network and a television studio. I'm getting a little bit technical, but I'll try to simplify it. So a network is a show, is who broadcasts, it's the channel that actually broadcasts TV. And the studio is actually responsible for the physical production of making the TV show. And all the major networks have kind of their under their umbrella partner studios, like ABC. The network has ABC Studios. And so the studio is who's in charge of actually making the show. And so that's who you would pitch, that's your first step. That's who you pitch to first. You go to the studios, you pitch them your idea, and if one of them likes it, then together you would pitch to the networks, which are the channels that will be broadcasting them. And when you pitch to the networks, if they buy, like when you see someone announce that they sold something to a network, what the network is really doing is they're actually just committing to buying a script from you. Unless you're, Shonda Rhimes or somebody, then they would probably go straight to series with you or something like that. But for most writers, when you sell something to a network, it means that they are buying a pilot script, a single script from you, and you work with them. And so when you're developing, when someone says they're developing, they're probably that usually means that they're writing that script that they sold. And so you write the script, the pilot script of what would be your TV show, and then when you hear the term, oh, somebody got greenlit to pilot, somebody got a pilot green light, it means that now the script has been turned in, the network read it, and they're saying we want to take it to the next level, the next step, which is we actually want to shoot the script and make a pilot. So when you hear actors talk about pilot season, that's in January when all the major networks do their orders for their pilots. They all do it at the same time. And so for actors, I'll let Jimmy talk about that part. But that means that you're getting to make your pilot. And then when you hear somebody got a series pickup, that means it actually gets to become a TV show that will air. So series pickup means that they're ordering a whole season of this TV show, and that's when you get to assemble a writer's room, you write all the scripts, then you start shooting it, and then in the fall it goes on TV.
That's all?
That's all. So it's incredibly difficult to get a show on TV. That's why it's so frustrating when I see bad shows on TV, because there are so few chances to get a show on TV, and then I see like the same people with the same crappy shows, and I get furious.
And this is for network television,
Yes,
right?
this is for network television.
For however many pilots, like say every network shoots about 20 pilots a year?
Yeah, so they buy about 200 scripts a year. They shoot 20 pilots, 10 comedy, 10 drama, and out of those, they probably 3 will go to series.
Well, and and 3 maybe once every other year, one of those shows will make it over 2 seasons. It's a very crapshoot in the network, and the good thing is, like as an January, February, March is pilot season. Some people fly out from New York, Atlanta, whatever. That's where every actor, you see all the Airbnbs rented by actors, because they just come here to audition for like 2-3 months straight, try to get on one of those pilots. And so many times you get to the testing, well, to get on those pilots, first you gotta read on tape, get the audition, and then you get a call back with the casting director, and then maybe you get a test with 3 other actors, and then you shoot the pilot, and then maybe you don't make it. Like George Clooney, I think famously, was in 16 different pilots that failed before he got, what was it?
Well, he was on Roseanne as like a guest, and then he got ER was his big
ER,
break.
ER,
But
yeah.
he'd been trying for years.
Yeah, so it's a great crapshoot, and the good thing now is with all the streaming services, with HBO, Netflix, FX, and TBS even, it's taken you out of the, pitch in August and audition in February mindset. So it's more year round, and a lot more series are like going straight to series, especially with Netflix.
Yeah, the cable networks, they do year round. So there isn't like, it's not like the networks where it's like, they, the same time every year everybody does all their pilots. Like, that's the nice thing about cable is they just do it whenever. They do year round, it doesn't really matter, they're not really on a schedule. And Netflix famously they don't develop pilots, they just go straight to series. So you kind of have to invest in yourself a little bit. Whereas when a network orders a script from you, they pay you to write that script. But with Netflix, I don't know if they still do it like this, but I know for a while they were doing it where you write a script on spec. On spec means you do it for free. But if they like it, the gamble is if they like it, they order it straight to series, and you don't have to do that extra step of making a pilot. But the downside is you might spend all this time writing a script for free, and they might not like it. So it's really, this whole business is about investing in yourself. And even when we talk about like breaking your parents' hearts and telling them that you want to pursue this, you just have to think about it as I'm investing in myself, I'm the stock, and I'm hoping that eventually this will pay off, and really that's kind of how you have to think about it.
Yeah, and you want to have scripts ready. If you're an actor, you want to have scripts ready to develop when that big agency calls you, when you do get that big break. Same thing with writers. You want to not just have that one script, but you want to been writing for like 5 years. So when you do get that meeting, when they say, oh, we're not really looking for this family drama, but what else you got? So you just got to be ready for that opportunity, because it'll be too late if, say, CAA calls you and they're like, oh, I heard you're the new hot writer out of whatever, and then you're like, what do you have? You're like, well, I have ideas, but I got nothing. The ideas are here, right? Like, and then you got to get a script, and then you got to get a deal, and then maybe you get something on TV to get you some heat, and then an Emmy is somewhere up there for Jessica Gao.
Rarefied air.
Well, because the thing is, talk is meaningless, because everybody can talk big, everybody can say, ideas are a dime a dozen, Everyone can say, I have a bunch of ideas, but it really takes the gap between I have a bunch of great ideas and I've actually executed them and finished them and written scripts is vast. The amount of people on this side greatly outnumber the people on this side, and you never know when you're going to get an opportunity, so you have to be ready because you don't know if you're going to get a second one. And also, you only get one chance to make a first impression, so if someone actually gives you an opportunity and their first impression of you is, oh, I don't know, I don't have anything, that's their impression of you, They're very unlikely to come back to you again.
I definitely echo that sentiment of like, there are virtually no writers who write their first script and have it be sold. Like if you're thinking that way, oh, I'm gonna write the best script ever and it's gonna sell and I'm gonna succeed. Maybe there's one person like that, I don't know, but
And they're lying.
but the vast majority of people have been writing and writing and writing and writing, like scripts piled up to the ceiling before they had their big break. It's like, and then they came out of nowhere. And it's like, no, they didn't come out of nowhere.
People love that romantic story of like, oh, this person was discovered and they'd only done this one thing, but like, that's all just like folk tales and like legends that people have embellished. Like, things take hard work. And,
Now, I think the Chinese industry, though, in television might operate, I know a little bit about it, and it blew me away. So, Rachel, for example, I was reading about the big hit show in China during the summer. It was the concubine drama, the story of Yanxi Palace. And this show, between, I think it was July and October, dropped 70 episodes, the entire series. And this isn't out of the ordinary for Chinese TV shows to drop 50, 60, 70.
It is ordinary. It's actually a
how
have to.
does the development of this kind of a show in China go from pitch to writing? Who writes all 70 of these scripts?
I think, Yara Laoshi knows more about this, but I think it's a requirement from the platforms. China's Netflix's, iQIYI, Youku, Tencent, they need shows over 60 episodes. If it's, genre is period drama or it's a huge, production, it has to be over 60 because they think that'll attract more users to their website and buy the membership monthly. Yeah, it's a thing. Say if you have a really good story and it's only 30 episodes, you have to expand it to
You're
60.
a failure. 30
So
episodes.
you have to add water to it. That means it's 注水. You have to. How can you, if you already have a 30 episode story, how can you make it 60? It's impossible for writers, right? But so they might, the production company or financier or platform, they might hire new writers to write the new stuff to add on to until there's 60 episodes. Yeah.
That's so
have
painful to
this
listen
similar
to.
experience. Yeah, we
My
actually,
mind is about to
we were
explode.
pitching to one of the platforms about a mini-series. We wanted to do a mini-series, only 6 episodes. They were like, not impossible. You have to do at least 18 or 24 episodes. So we're like, what can we do?
I love
you
that,
have to
yeah.
change it.
A 24-episode miniseries.
So can I ask for you, how do the writers, if there's multiple writers working on the 60-episode series,
Yeah. I've
do-
heard
do
ugly
they-
stories.
do they work in a room together on it, or is it
Sometimes they don't even meet with each other. Yeah. Right. A writer, maybe the writer is really good. He, writes the 30 episodes. But it's in the financier's hands. They might give it to another writer to expand it to 60 episodes to make them happy.
We do have something similar in our industry when it comes to, especially feature scripts. There's a factory of writers sometimes that go through something like that, but not for that. 70 episodes is, okay, I'm one of those Asians who's bad at math, so I'm just gonna say 80,000 pages or some huge amount. That's amazing.
I think there's a feature on those platforms. You can watch it 2 times or 1.5 times, so it's not that boring. I watched Yan Xi Gong with 1.5. It's great, yeah. And very entertaining.
The speed, you speed it up, right?
They have the feature. You should go to the website and
I
try
even
it.
got nothing to say. If somebody's gonna watch my acting in 1.5 times, I'm gonna kill myself.
You're speaking like this.
Everything you're describing seems like the antithesis of creating good quality content. It's like every single way they could possibly make it not a good product, they've done it.
But they have 70 episodes.
But is it successful? Do people watch it? Is it good? Or
People
does
still
it matter?
watch it because they don't have other choices. They have to watch something.
But
every
that
hour.
particular show, I would say, and another show called Nirvana and Fire, both were really big hits and reminded me of kind of like a Chinese Game of Thrones with a lot of.
What's the name of the show? Oh, 琅琊榜. Oh.
So I've seen some of those shows and I feel like even though it seems like at the extremes, the development process is very different. At the heart of it, these are still, especially the bigger shows, are big, sprawling dramas that have a lot of similarities to kind of the American shows. But actually, Jimmy, let me ask you, because as an actor, you might be asked to be in a 70-episode show in China in the future or something. But you've actually had a really terrific year. I was trying to count on IMDb. Just this year alone, you've been in 3 movies, including Crazy Rich Asians, countless TV episodes. Yeah, give it up. I'm gonna start a rumor that you might be the next James Bond. Who knows, right? Exactly. Look at this. And one of the things you discuss in your book is that throughout your career, you've had times when you've played Asian characters with accents and without accents. And can you kind of share your feelings about how you approach the different types of characters that you play? Because I think you have a really good insight on that in the book.
I think at the end of the day, I try to just approach it as an actor. you know, as an art form instead of a caricature. Like, how come when a white person, an American white person, does a British accent, we're like, oh my God, he did such a great job. You know, he's an artist, good for him. But when I do a Chinese accent, they're like, oh, he's being a stereotype. That's kind of ridiculous to me as an artist. But I understand where that comes from because there's not enough Asian representation out there. So I'm 1 out of 5 people on TV, so whoever I portray is very important, right? But at the same time, I grew up in Hong Kong. My parents are from Shanghai. I'm very Chinese. I didn't come here until I was 13, and I think most people here are like more Chinese than I think the ABCs here, right? The ABCs always have a very negative connotation of Asian accents because they don't want to kind of be associated with that. Like, that's not fair because I am American. Why am I grouped in with these foreigners, right? But for me, I was one of those foreigners that wasn't accepted by these ABCs when I came to this country. Like, when I came here, I expected white people, black people not to accept who I am because I'm just different. I couldn't really speak the language. But one of the most painful things was when other Chinese kids that were born here didn't want to have nothing to do with me because they're like, oh, because if I hang out with him, I'm gonna look foreign as hell, you know? So I don't want to be associated with that person. And that's kind of the same thing with the on-screen. So for me, if I'm gonna play an immigrant character like Jing Yang on Silicon Valley, I just gotta do it right. Like the accent, I gotta do it real. I'm not gonna do like a fake, like Bruce Lee accent or like a, you know, the stereotypical accent that people do. Like, if he's from Hong Kong or whatever, yeah, of course. But I just want a very specific accent that I got from, you know, listening to my mom, listening to my uncles and stuff like that. And his mannerism and behavior, I kind of understood that person because he was a version of myself like 10 years ago. So I just try to do it in a way where it becomes a more three-dimensional character where it's not just a joke for the accent. And season 1, like you were working there, and Jing Yang was kind of a little bit like that, but throughout the season it was expanded. So I think I was pretty happy overall with how it came out, and it's ridiculous, I think, for people, because I know Asian actors out there, just like, I would not audition for anything that's just an accent. To me, that's doing, you're like shunning your own immigrant sisters, you know?
Okay,
All right, let's go on.
so I don't 100% agree with Jimmy, and I think that, here's the thing, like, I understand.
We talked about
We talk about this a lot. I mean, I totally 100% respect the perspective he has, but there's two sides of that because the other half of that are Asian Americans who are tired of seeing themselves as the other on screen. And the difference is that you also have to acknowledge that there is a power dynamic within the film industry in America. You know, it is a white supremacist system that's in place where white people have always had the power, and it's a system that's built with that kind of systemic racism built into it. And so anytime you talk about stuff like that, you always have to think about who's in power, who's being made fun of. So it's not a one-to-one just to say, like, why does a white guy get to do a British accent? It doesn't mean anything, because it's a guy in power who's mimicking another guy in power. So it doesn't matter, you're not punching down. And so the difference with characters who are written stereotypically or have the stereotypical accent, you have to first think about, like, first of all, was this written by a white guy to laugh at Asians, or was this written by somebody else where the intent is to laugh with this character? Are they laughing with us or are they laughing at us? That's a huge difference, you know? And the theme with Jin Yang in the first season of Silicon Valley is he was made to just, I mean, he only had one line and it was to laugh at this funny foreigner. And I think Jimmy did a really fantastic job of, over the course of several seasons, turning him into this very complex, well-rounded, funny and insane character that stands alone, you know? It's not just that he has an accent. If you took away his accent at this point, he's still a funny, like, unique and great character. And really that's what we all want, which is characters that can stand alone with or without the accent. Of course, like, their identity should be a part of who they are, but it shouldn't just be the accent. It shouldn't just be like a bunch of like 50-year-old white writers who are like, oh, look at this guy, he's so different and I want to laugh at him because he doesn't speak English the way I do. Like, that's not what I want, you know? And so when you talk about whether or not to do an accent, it's a lot more nuanced than just a yes or no. I don't think it should be a black and white thing. I think it's kind of a case by case, and there are many, many different layers that you kind of have to examine.
To add to that, I thought that was really enlightening, especially hearing about your perspective, Jimmy, on like how to approach a character with an accent versus without. As a writer, somebody like one thing that really stuck with me early on in my career, I was an intern. I was working on a project, and there was a character who was an Asian American man who had an accent portrayed in a very negative, like, haha, look at you, you're funny way. And he did it, like, I was there to sort of like help with some of the Chinese stuff because so I was helping a little bit. And like, he came up to me afterwards, he's like, look, I know this is effing racist, but I have to do my job. Like, I have to get a job. And so that really stuck with me because I was like, oh, like, this is what happens. Like, you're faced with this decision of like, I know he knows it's racist, but he's like, I also want to be an actor. So that balance. And so like, it always, I feel like I have a bit of a responsibility to make sure that like, you know, if there is a character that is portrayed, because usually you just get one Asian character on your show, right? Like, at very most two. Hawaii Five-O is a little different in that it is truly diverse, I think. But like, do you, like, maybe there's a way to recontextualize. Like, you have a character with an accent who's not portrayed in a funny way. And it's like, you know, it's part of who he is or she is as a character, as a person who could be like a romantic person, who can be portrayed as like a dark and like, you know, brooding person instead of just only just one way. So I do think about that a lot.
Now, obviously, representation and you know what's going on with Crazy Rich Asians, Fresh Off the Boat, hopefully upcoming shows from Jessica and another.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. Another K-Town drama, I think, at HBO being set up. But how is this perceived, perhaps from kind of the mainland Chinese point of view? Like Ray, for example, or Rachel, like Crazy Rich Asians is going to get its release. Crazy Rich Asians.
This is so Chinese what's happening right now.
Exactly.
Did we get that off? This is being
Another
recorded.
stereotype.
So, but how do you guys kind of perceive, for example, how the characters in Crazy Rich Asians were portrayed? And how do you think the Chinese audience is going to respond to that when it's released in China here in a few weeks?
I can just talk about my feeling. Although I've only stayed in US for less than 1 year, I think for the ethnic minority filmmakers, making character less unique of their minority heritage would be thought of too Caucasian. But by contrast, if your character embrace your minority heritage, the audience will not relate or accept it. So it's a very hard thing to balance those two stuff together. I think Crazy Rich Asians just did a great job because the director has successfully bridged the divide by addressing the issues of stereotype and the creative storytelling. For the Asian stereotype, from Western perspective, it has already developed over many decades. So I think it will take time to reverse those stereotypes. And Crazy Rich Asians, this film, the director not only embrace the Asian stereotypes that Westerners made for Asian people, but also take advantage of it to add a lot of dimensions and layer of the Asian and Chinese, and just to make the American audience know the merits of the Asian people. So I think it's very, it's a great thing. So I like the movie. Yeah.
It's really good because Jimmy's sitting right here, so.
Because I think his storytelling strategy is just embrace the stereotype because that's what the Westerner audience familiar with. And then you can add some new dimensions, some new different facets and layers to the characters so that the audience can empathize and resonate with the character. So I think it's without showcasing the breakthrough of the stereotype, that movie would not have been that successful.
I haven't seen the film. I'm so sorry.
Look what you did. Look what you did, Jimmy. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I should have asked.
that's a good
I
excuse.
was like waiting for a VOD right now. Do you know when it's gonna, be on iTunes?
Yeah, I think you pre-order on iTunes now, but I'm sure
I'll do the pre-order.
there were a ton of
I will.
bootleg DVDs. Everybody has seen it in China already, so I don't know how it's gonna do.
Yeah. But I'm a little bit worried about the marketing in China right now. I don't really like the name, the Chinese name, 摘金奇缘, right? I like if they translate just say 凤凰亚洲富豪, that would be more attractive to the audience, just from a pure audience perspective. 摘金奇缘is kind of like, it's a little bit you don't know what the story is about.
We should call it concubines getting beat. So all the tickets. Yeah, my mother-in-law.
Sold on the spot. Now,
Concubines and mother-in-laws.
now we have 5 minutes, I think, left. So I would love to see if there was any audience questions, perhaps, for our great panelists. Do we have a microphone runner at all? I think that's me, actually. So this gentleman right here.
Hi, I'm just curious about your perspectives on opportunities for Chinese Americans to work on projects for the Chinese market.
So maybe Rachel, have you worked with Chinese American writers for Chinese content, like mainland Chinese content?
So Chinese American writers who can write in Chinese, right? Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean, it could be. It could be. To be honest, like I've worked on mainland Chinese projects and I've written in English, and they have a translator. So
I think if there's a true bilingual writer, that would be such a treasure, like out there. Like really, not really bilingual, but culturally, can understand, like both culture. Like, hey.
he wrote a book.
Nice to meet
How
you.
much are we paying here? What are we talking about? No, seriously, the pay gap, or is there a pay gap between Chinese writers in China and American writers in the
I think
WGA?
depending on the range of the project. Yeah, depending on the budget.
And I think if the Chinese writer writes 70
Yeah, if you want to
episodes,
write 70
we're probably doing
that'll be a
pretty
lot
good.
of money.
So, I think the target audience is a very important issue. The target audience should be attached as a top priority constantly. And if you want to do something in China, you need to know who's the target audience now. Actually, nowadays, the number of moviegoers in large cities has already reached its saturation point for film business, which means that there is no, the audience are not increasing in big cities. Rather, in the small city or small towns, the movie-going public are increasing very rapidly. So actually, they are the main target for the Chinese film business now. And a term was coined to describe them, which is small-town kids or small-town youngsters, 小镇青年. So you have to know their desire and what they want. You need to maybe analyze their habits and their favorite stuff. Like last year there is a film called The Werewolf 2, 战狼2. So most of the box office was contributed by the small town youngsters. So based on what I know, they have some characteristics, unlike the other youngster subculture, that characterized by the counter-culture movement, anti-mainstream, anti-tradition. They embraced and stand up more for the patriotism, stand up for the mainstream and tradition. So I think you need to firstly know who is your target audience and know what they want.
Now, is there, I think we have a few more minutes if we're running till, I think, 4:45-ish. We got a few more minutes for some questions. Is that a question in the back there, I think? Great. Can we run this microphone?
So I want to know more about how writers work together in the writers' room, especially when you guys sit together and talk about issues, how you guys collaborate with each other and make sure that you guys get the best idea and can, each of the writer can provide the best idea for the group. Yeah.
So the writer's room, you know, like the showrunner wants to piggy off the pilot season storyline. Like, so once the show is greenlit to series, the showrunner is going to want to assemble a room, and usually he or she does like interviews to make sure that they get a room that with writers with perspectives that can serve the story that they're trying to tell. And to work together, yes, we do. It depends on like specific rooms. For most rooms, yes, you do sit like from like 10 or 11 to 5 or 6 to discuss story, and it's on a board, and you know, whether it's with note cards or whiteboard. How we best work together, I think, you know, a good way is if you're a newer writer, to first be listening to the ideas of where, you know, the room, like where the room is going. If are we talking about, you know, this relationship today, and like, so then like, it would serve you really well to like listen and to contribute to that instead of like, oh no, let's talk about something else. Really, another good way to contribute in the writer's room is instead of just saying no to ideas, like, I don't like that, like always be providing a solution to the problem, because you're always wanting to move things forward instead of slowing things down.
Yeah, comedy rooms and drama rooms are slightly different in the way we work. I mean, the gist of it is the same, and to piggyback on what Helen was saying about when somebody starts hiring a writing staff, think of a writing staff as a sports team. Any sports team, because I wouldn't know the positions, but like, like when I first started, like I used to think like, oh, I have to be the best at everything, I have to be the best writer, and then I realized you can't really be the best, like at every single position, you know? Like, everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and you don't have to be the best at everything. Some people are good at story and structure, some people are good at character and emotional arcs, some people are just good at jokes, some people are really good at writing dialogue, and so figure out what you're good at and really hone those skills, and just don't stress out if you're not good at every single aspect of writing, because when somebody is assembling a writing staff, they're looking at it like it's a team, and they're like, okay, I need a couple of this position, I need a couple of this position, I need a couple of that position. They're not going to be like, oh, I just need an entire team of 100% perfect writers. They're trying to assemble, like, putting together, it's like fantasy football, like they're putting together what their dream like lineup is of different kinds of positions. And so it's really helpful if you know exactly what position you play, and that way when you meet with somebody, you can say, like, in the room, like, I'm best at this, this, and this. And the thing is, when by the time you actually get a meeting to be hired, that means that they've already read your writing. Because they don't meet with people unless they've already read your script. So by the time you get in the room with them, they already like your writing. At that point, it's more of like a personality test. They want to make sure you're not a psycho. They want to make sure that you're not an asshole. Because the thing is, you will be stuck in a room, hopefully not windowless, but sometimes windowless room for like 40 to 60 hours a week with this group of people trying to make something creative together. And that's a very, like, could be a very tense, high pressure situation. And so they want to make sure that all the personalities matter just as much as your skill level in writing, because they're thinking, when they're meeting you, they're thinking, do I want to spend 60 hours away from my family, like with this person in a room trying to make something? And that's just as important. And so in a comedy writer's room, what we do is we break all the stories together. So everybody like kind of comes up with ideas, what would be funny stories, or sometimes people just start pitching funny jokes and things like that, but everybody contributes and everybody talks out every single episode. So even though an episode will say written by so-and-so, every single person had a part in that episode. We talk out all the stories together, and when we've talked an episode out enough where we feel like, okay, this can go to outline, depending on the show, some shows, everybody writes the outline together, other shows, whoever's going to write that episode takes that outline and writes it themselves. But when it says written by so-and-so, that means that that person was responsible for writing the actual script. So even though everybody in that room talked out like what happens in this episode and what all the jokes are, wherever they want to write, and actually sits down and looks at a blank page and writes out that entire first script, that first draft, that's the person who gets the credit for that episode. When they've written like a couple of drafts of their script, then in a comedy room, it goes back to the room, Every single person on that staff reads it, everybody still pitches ideas. We do what's called punch up, which means that you try to make it, you go through the whole thing page by page, and you try to add more jokes, you try to polish up the dialogue, make everything funny, you fix what's not working, but everybody kind of pitches in and has a hand in it.
And I'll just add, and on a totally serious note, the room must have infinite snacks, and you really do need to buy lunch for people, because if you don't and you tell them to go get lunch, they won't come back. So on that note, I want to make sure we have enough time, because after this panel, immediately after, Jimmy will have a few minutes to sign copies of How to American, an immigrant's guide to disappointing your parents. And you'll be able to purchase the book as well as have a signed copy. And if we can just have a second to really thank our incredible panel. This was super fun. And thank you, all of you, for coming out to support the second annual LACFF.
By the way, unpaid endorsement, I've read the book and it's really funny.
Thank you. I agree. It's on my Kindle. Thank you.